Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GM Philosopher, and today we're talking about easy D&D world building that players will love. Now I gotta give a shout out. This video topic was requested by Alex Sandarp 1709. And basically, here's what Alex said. Video idea, world building, things to consider when creating a fantasy world. I've often seen DMs having trouble with going too wide in their design or too narrow. Finding that sweet spot for the world to function is something that might be an interesting topic. Structure of politics, society, magic, and how to approach those. Another great video. Love your channel. So thank you so much, Alex Sandarp 1709. I really appreciate this. Great question. Awesome question. And hey, if you have a question, drop me a comment and ask it. I try to get to all my questions and make videos answering them. And I want to basically just start out here by saying there's a problem. What is the problem? The problem here is that world building is very easy to go too wide on. You might find yourself working for 8, 10, 12 hours on a world state and then be disappointed when you jump into the game and like none of it is used, or worst case scenario, it's conflicting with other things you want to do, and it just isn't really working. It's hard to explain to your characters, right? Confusing is a problem. But an equally bad problem is to jump into a game and have players be like, okay, well, what's the world like? Do you have a map? Is there tell us about the political situation, tell us about the religion, and you're just like, because you didn't think through any of those things. And so these are the problems. These are two sides of the same coin, the coin being the problem with world building. So how can we solve this? And I have put together four tips, basically 4 steps, that if you take these 4 steps into account every single game, and really every single session as the game progresses, you will not have a problem with this. Your world building will be amazing. It'll feel on point. It'll be just enough without being too much. You will not overwork yourself, and you will have a lot more fun, and your players will feel that powerful immersion that comes from an awesome world state, okay? I also have a bonus tip at the end that is so crazy simple, but you'd be amazed how often it is overlooked. I have overlooked this many times, and it's really hurt my games. When I stopped overlooking this one little detail, then my games it's amazing how much better they got. And it's so simple. I'm going to share it with you at the end because these other 4 things really come first. And then we're going to get to that bonus tip. So you're going to want to stay for all 4 of these tips. You're going to want to hear that bonus tip when we get in there so we can solve this problem. Okay. Now, one more thing before we start here, I just want to encourage you, if you have any tips about this for Alex Sandarp 1709, if you have any ideas, if you have solved this problem in your games, if you have a method that works, please drop it in the comments. I want to provide maximum value, and I want to keep that conversation going in the comments. Another thing I want you to encourage you to do is to go down into the description, grab my plot randomizer ebook. It's free. You can roll on the D100 tables, create awesome plot hooks on the fly in the beginning of your session, in the middle of your session. When your players mess your plans up, you can quickly roll up a new one. Literally has 4 D100 tables to help you do that. You can download it and you can print it out. But even more importantly, when you grab that ebook, you join my email list, and hey, I've got some exciting stuff coming down the pipe, and I've started sending out emails. I've got Magic Mondays. I do deep dive D&D tips on Mondays. I have Wondrous Wednesdays where I share GM wisdom on Wednesdays, and then I have D&D Fast Tip Fridays. Fast tips to help you increase the quality of your games over the weekend. So don't forget to jump in there, download that ebook, and join my email list so you get those emails. And I've got other exciting things coming down the pipe too, and you'll be the first to hear about them if you're on my email list. All right, with that being said, we are now ready to jump into this. So let's start with the first tip, the first rule. Start with a premise that will affect your players. There's a lot going on in the world, and I'm going to use my own world state as an example. I have a whole world state. In fact, I could show you the map. I've literally printed out a whole world map. Look at that. Ain't she a beauty? Okay, and all the continents are named and all this. There's a lot going on. Every continent has its own nonsense. But here's the thing, is that the players do not need to. They don't care. There's no reason for them to need to understand all that complicated stuff right now. They really only need to understand what's affecting them immediately. So where you want to start with the world building is I didn't start with the continents. I didn't even start with the world state idea. I didn't start with the big bad evil guy idea. I didn't start with any of that. I started with a premise that I wanted to affect my players. And this is how I always start my world building. And then I build out from there. So what's the premise? The premise was I wanted to have a story where the group of players were actually refugees and immigrants from a war-torn country who were trying to immigrate, actually flee to a new country, and they were going to have to live a difficult life and kind of get started as refugees and immigrants in a country that was not very kind to immigrants. And so there's because there's going to be kind of like an urban refugee struggle and political struggle, social struggle, cultural struggle going on. Plus there were going to be, lots of people out to get them, out to try to exploit them, to try to take advantage of them, right? So that was the premise. Okay, this is how it started. So I think they're on a ship and they're literally coming into port. They're on like the refugee ship. What is the trip? What has that journey been like? What kind of things have they gone through? What do they have with them? What were they able to bring? What happened to them on the ship? What happened before they boarded the ship? So these are all questions that really helped me to prompt this. But you start with that premise of what will affect your players. So what's affecting my players in this first scene is, and setting up the campaign, is they're refugees, right? So that's the premise. And we want to start there because we want to start with the players. If I started too big, it's going to be abstract. It's not going to matter to them, but this matters to them because it's the situation that directly affects them. Now let's move on to rule number 2. Figure out how you want your players to interact with this premise. Okay. So what do I want them to do? What was the expectation? Well, the expectation was survival, trying to succeed when all of the odds are stacked against them, putting them in a situation where they were going to have to band together to figure out how to overcome these things. Like, how do we become citizens? Do we even want to become citizens? How do we rise above the temptation to just delve into petty crime because it's so hard to overcome the challenges of becoming a legal citizen? Like the country they were fleeing to, basically, that was all the money they had to flee to this country. And basically what happened was they're in a situation where it was so expensive to try to become citizens, and yet they couldn't work because there was so much discrimination. People didn't want to hire people who aren't legal citizens. They literally get branded like with a magical temporary tattoo that give them immigrant status. So they're not even legally able to really work or even own property. They cannot get a magic license in this country. Is like to practice magic in public, you needed to get a license for it, and they were ineligible for those. So anytime they try to use magic outside of like their home, there's a potential that they could get a citation for it. Like, so there's all these things. So it's like, how do I want them to interact with it? Well, that's what I wanted. I wanted them to interact with it by overcoming those obstacles. So for me, in the very first quarter of the campaign, really the political situation, the whole war that drove them here, none of that was really that important. It was about a day-to-day struggle for survival, to get food, to get shelter, to not get beat up by dock worker gang members, to not get targeted by crooked, evil guards who are on the payroll of the mob, like all these different things, right? So for me, there is a big political situation. There's a big religious situation. The whole world is leaning into a state of possible worldwide conflict because of this one fanatical religious group who's trying to basically force their will on everyone else. And it's starting to happen. It's like a decade into that process, but that didn't matter to my players. Why? Because of the premise that affected them in the beginning. And then also what I wanted in terms of like how they're going to interact with that premise. And that didn't involve the big scene in the world. That just involved their struggle. That's what I wanted to focus on, right? Now, as we move into the second quarter of that campaign, the bigger scene, the bigger picture, the political picture is coming into it because the players have overcome that. They amassed some wealth. They leveled up. They become bosses in their own right. They now own ships. They have 2 ships and they're sailing. Literally, they left that country and they're headed to another country and they're pursuing a plot that is bigger in the world, kind of going to war against the people who conquered their homeland. And so that's taking them into the bigger picture. But that bigger picture wasn't the original premise. And the only reason they're doing that is because they chose to do it, which is, I think, is very exciting. And I'm very happy it's going that way. But do you see what I'm saying? Like, we want to think about what will affect the players, start there, and then start with the premise of how we want them to interact with that kind of setting. And then we want to focus on that. Anything else, we can trickle in little bitty pieces here and there, but we don't want to try to ram it all down the players' throats. That might be too much. They're going to care a lot more about who's running the church on the corner, where we might be able to get some free bread, or who might pay us to do this job because we need to pay for an inn, right? Or we need to buy a new sword. Those are the things that were on their minds. Or it's like, how can we get this one official to give us a temporary magic permit so that we can hunt this monster and get paid for it, but not get arrested for casting spells at it in broad daylight, right? So it's like, these are the problems that they were caring about. If I was trying to push the bigger political picture onto them, it would have been like too much. And so that's like the too broad part, right? But having that context helps me to trickle in the little bits, which is why I wanted to understand the bigger premise so that I can really run the limited premise, the one that affects the players in a good way. Okay, now this brings us to tip number 3, point number 3. As you build the world, focus on the players, then work your way outward as needed to fill in the richer details and deeper stories. Okay, so this is pretty much just expounding on the first 2 points I've already said. But what will happen is, as the players explore the world, as they amass wealth, as they level up, as they gain more power, they're going to grow in their understanding of your world state. And this always works best when you have a good idea for your world state. And then you kind of always think of it like you got to always be 2 steps ahead of the players. You don't need to have everything fleshed out right now. But you do want to have overarching ideas kind of like articulated in your own mind for what you want the world situation to be like politically, the religions of the world, what are countries doing, what are the royalty doing, what are the big conflicts going on, what are the big situations. But those things are only you're only going to give the players probably 5% of what is drawn up for those things, unless they go searching for it in a deeper way, which they will if it becomes part of a main plot arc for them. But that's only going to happen over time. So over time, you'll grow that, and you'll probably flesh out, fill in those details, right? So for example, my group, at first it was just survival, and then they managed to steal a ship. Okay. The larger politics of the world state didn't matter while they were trying to steal that ship. However, once they stole the ship and they got free and clear, now they're kind of like pirates, right? But they're trying to go straight. So they're forging ownership, they're forging a bill of sale that they bought the ship and yada, yada, yada. But the thing is that they realized there was cargo on the ship that was contraband, right? That was going to be smuggled to the Dragonborn embassy on this island offshore. So it turns out that when they went to this island, that island was the Dragonborn embassy was expecting them, and now it got complicated. And the Dragonborn embassy was tied to the bigger plot of there's the Dragonborn homeland of Dracoria. There's a ancient red dragon named Scalethar who has launched a new religion called the Rite of the Crimson Scale. He believes it's the only true religion that matters, and he's trying to wipe out the influence of all the other gods. They're starting out diplomatically, but when diplomacy fails, they're invading countries, forcing their will upon the races and the religious people there, basically saying you will accept Scalethar or you'll be put to the fire, right? So it's this big situation that's getting ready to boil over. One country's already been invaded. That was the player's homeworld. But see, in the minute-to-minute details of the first quarter of the campaign, those things didn't matter so much. But now, as the group has traveled out further, these Dragonborn are now making new trouble for them. The Dragonborn are where's our stuff? Trying to attack them, talking smack. Eventually, it led to an all-out conflict. They had a military conflict. They wiped out the Dragonborn base. Now they've made bigger enemies. So it's all coming around full circle. They were running from the Dragonborn conflict when they were didn't have the power to fight back. Now they've got some power, they got some property, and now it's coming back around again. This isn't by accident. This is partly me putting things in their path that kind of like herald back to the fate, the destiny, the idea of the main plot arc of the story, which is kind of their destiny. They don't have to choose to pursue that, but they did, and they are choosing to pursue it. So as you can see, I'm kind of like the world is widening for them as they grow and as their influence grows and their ability to handle more stuff grows and as they learn about the world state. So there's a lot. Like, we got out the world map just a couple sessions ago for the very first time. I didn't throw down the world map in the very first quarter of the campaign. Why? They were literally in one city. I showed them a map of the local area. So like I had a small map of like the southern tip of that continent. But that's as far as their understanding reached at that time. And that's as far as their awareness was. And that was even bigger than what they needed, because they were kind of talking about what are our possibilities? Should we leave the city or should we stay in it? That was as big as they were thinking. Now they're thinking, where should we sail in the world, right? So there's the world map now becomes the key part. Now, and this leads us to number 4. You probably only need about 5% of your actual world state built when you launch the game. The rest of it can, should, and likely will be built as you game. Gather more inspiration and fill in the backdrop details of player character adventures. Okay. So the truth of the matter is, every time we have a game session, I create a little bit more world lore. And that is prompted by the characters exploring, asking questions, doing things. So I have the infrastructure. There's the basic skeleton of the world state, the story. There's the continents. There's sort of like the ecology of the continents. There's the cultures of those continents, basically. But there are obviously a lot of things that are not fleshed out. And this is on purpose. I didn't go trying to write volumes of stuff about this, because it's like a, generated world state. As the players learn, I'm going to be creative and I'm going to fill in those blanks and come up with new stuff. And we're going to create it rich and it's going to be fresh every session. And that's how we go. And that's where you get that balance, once again, of going too big, going too narrow. If I didn't have the skeleton of my world state fleshed out, if I didn't have the bigger political scheme, the bigger religious situation, if those things were not planned out, then I'd be looking at a situation where I'd be scratching my head and it might get clunky because I'm trying to do too much improvisation. You can improvise, but for me, I know that improvisation works better when I have a framework within which to improvise. So I've got my world state skeleton and I improvise within it. For me, that works so much better. And that's where you get that not doing too much, but also not doing enough. If you don't have a skeleton, you might struggle with the bigger picture and making it feel cohesive. Whereas if you try to flesh out everything all the time, you might have a detail overload. You might even literally run into a situation where you have a whole bunch of information for a continent written down. And then when someone asks about it, you have to take a 5-10 minute break just to look up what you wrote, instead of just being like, oh yeah, here we go. What you find here is you find the village. This village is inhabited by these types of people. You see that they're riding camels. They're kind of wearing these, robes. They have these curved swords, and there are like snake charmers, right? So it's like maybe you're gonna riff, you're gonna cook that up as you play. This is inspiring. You're rolling with the moment using your improvisation. So you're not digging around in a book and just like reading something you wrote 3 months ago about this, and then maybe it's a stale idea by now, right? Might not even fit super well. I'm not saying that it would be a stale idea or that it wouldn't fit or that you can't write things down in advance. I'm just kind of talking about how I balance that doing too much versus not doing enough, and where I find that balance. And then once I articulate it, once I create it, well, now it becomes canon because it goes into our session notes. Plus, we draw it on the map. My map is printed out with almost no cities or anything on it. And then we go through and we write out, they mark down the places they find. And then every so often I go back in and I use Canva and I just put those places in the map, reprint it, and boom, our map continues to evolve as we move along. Okay. And that's going to lead me to my bonus tip. Okay. My bonus tip for this one is create a world map. I would recommend that you do this in the very beginning. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can draw it on a big piece of paper. I've done that many times. You can always come back later and make it better. You could always hire someone to draw you a map later on if you need to. You could create an amazing world map right from the beginning. You might go online, get a map of Greyhawk. Maybe you're going to play in Greyhawk setting. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it matters that much. I think that just having a world map, though, and again, you don't even have to show it to the players right away, but this will help you as a GM. That's a part of the skeleton of your story. And once you show it to your players, that will allow so much room for creativity. In fact, I'm going to send you to a video I made about this. The very first video I published on this channel was about creating a map for your world. And so you can go back and watch that if you want. But that's my bonus tip. Create that world map. It's going to make for a richer experience for you and your players. And there you go. That is everything I have to say about this one. I hope that this has been useful and inspiring. And I hope that my tips about easy D&D world building will help you to create a world that your players will love, that you will enjoy running. I have zero doubt you will crush it. All of you amazing GMs out there, you have so much creativity. Just trust yourself, have fun, believe in the process, and it will be awesome. With that being said, that's going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for coming by. Give me a thumbs up and a subscribe. My little channel's growing, and I try every single day to grow a little bit more. And right now, my goal is to reach 5,000 subs. So if you'll give me that like and that subscribe, it'll show my video to more people. And hey, that would be awesome. Thank you so much for coming by. I'm here almost every day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. So I will see you awesome people on the next one.